Hi, and welcome to Bridging the Gap, where conversations matter, understanding grows, and communication takes center stage. I'm your host, Harriet Hamilton. In a world where we are more connected than ever, it's easy to forget how far apart we can feel between generations, cultures, political views, or even just across the dinner table. Bridging the Gap is about digging deeper, listening harder, and building bridges. When people think of civil rights movement, they often remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. The march became a powerful call for racial equality, economic justice, and civil rights. Its impact helped shape the national conversation and paved the way for some of the most significant civil rights legislation in American history, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Joining me in this discussion are three participants of that march. I have Rebecca Walker, Joyce Coles, and Catherine Risk. Tell me, what was the rallying cry for you? Actually, first, I'm going to back up. Tell me a little bit about who you are. I'm sorry, I'm going to back up. Tell me a little bit about who you are.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Walker, and I've been in Piscataway for about 53 years. I moved here with my husband and my child after graduating from Boston University, and I worked in the school district as a social worker.
Joyce Coles.
I'm Joyce, and you've seen me on Women Talk and also Bridge the Gap. I have been in Piscataway for a very long time. I can't even think of the number. And I'm also a participant of the Senior Center.
Catherine.
I'm Catherine. I could tell you a lot of things because I've got my fingers in a lot of pies. I'm a solidarity singer. I'm a member of the People's Organization for Progress. I'm a Democratic Committee woman here in Piscataway. I'm married to Richard, 47 years, been living in Piscataway since 1989. What else would you like to know?
Well, okay, I'm going to get back to our discussion. Tell me, concerning the march, what was the rallying cry? What was the it that said, I'm going, for you, that said, I'm going to that march?
Well, for me, I was 14, and my parents were always listening to various people on TV. I remember watching them listen to Malcolm X, to Martin Luther King, and we lived in Westchester County, New York, and I think they were pretty active in the NAACP. So I don't feel like I was the rallying cry, but I feel like when they said we're going to go, I was ready to go, and I remember it pretty distinctly. I'd say, there were events after that got me kind of more rallied.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Joyce?
For me, it was probably watching television and watching the horrific attacks on human life, from the water hosing to the dogs on people, and watching that as a teenager, it made me angry. So when I heard about this march, that is what made me recognize there's something I could do, because the other things I couldn't participate in.
Right.
Catherine.
The rallying cry, I would say, was freedom. Maybe my experience is a little different from yours because I was an active member of the Congress of Racial Equality Washington, D.C. chapter. And it was at one of our meetings down at the Unitarian Church that this idea of having a national march on Washington came up. And we discussed it, and I don't remember if a formal vote was taken, but we said, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do it. So I was in this from the beginning. And I mean, you couldn't have kept me away from it. Actually, my father tried to keep me away from it because my parents were divorced in the summertime. He had custody, so that summer I was having to live with him and wife number 2 in Lillywhite, Northport, New York, on Long Island, in the North Shore. And so when I told him that I was going to the March on Washington, he said, no daughter of mine's going to be involved in any race riot, which is what we were hearing on the television from Walter Cronkite. That was the FBI's position. You know, J. Edgar Hoover was throwing all kinds of, he's a communist at Martin and all of that. But I told him it wasn't going to be a race riot. It was going to be a peaceful demonstration. I was going to go on the Corps bus from Port Authority with the other members of Corps from New York area. Well, it was it was the immovable object and the irresistible force. So neither of us would give in. So finally, Dad decided he would have to drive me himself, which he did. He had a little red sports car, convertible, and we drove down the New Jersey Turnpike, looking up at the sea of buses going down toward Washington with all these banners on them, freedom now and votes and I am a man and all of that. And Dad looked up and said, we'll never find a parking space this way. Of course, this was many years before the RFK Stadium was built with all that parking. He said, I know another way in. So he went down through Rockaway Park and down toward the tidal basin and found a parking space on the street. So we actually joined the march at the beginning because we were coming from the west. Everybody else was marching from the Capitol on the east. And that's how we ended up sitting in the folding chair section right up front.
Wow, that was great. Yeah.
Well,
how about
you know,
that?
he wasn't going to keep me away
Okay.
from that march. There's no way anybody was going to keep me away from that march. But I was 16, so, you know, and I had been an active member by that time for a couple of years. I mean, I had participated in the pickets when we desegregated the local hot dog.
Stands.
It wasn't a stand, it was at the
Market. It was.
not the Grants, the Woolworth store.
Oh, yeah.
So they wouldn't let me participate in any direct action because I was a minor, and they did not want charges of contributing to the delinquency of a minor thrown at the adults involved. So, but I was allowed to picket, I was allowed to leaflet. You know, I sang all the freedom songs with everybody, so I did all of that. And also, we had gone out to Reston, Virginia to desegregate the segregated housing development that was being built out there, and several other places. So, you know, I had been active for a while. And my action really got started many years earlier, come to think of it, because, you know, I always knew from the time I was a very small child the truth of what the Declaration of Independence says, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And I always knew that was true of men and women, despite my father's sexism and all the horrible television, the way women were portrayed back in those days. And, you know, when I began to see later on a little bit, as I grew up, what was being done to black people and how they were being treated differently from white people, I knew that was wrong. And then when my parents split up and Mom and I moved to Washington, and I grew up under Jim Crow, I mean, it wasn't the Deep South, but still everything was segregated. And I remember getting onto a bus, city bus, and seeing all these black people sitting in the back. And I felt so uncomfortable about that.
And where was this?
This was in Washington,
Just
Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Back in the
Interesting.
60s. Oh, yeah. I mean, you had the black, you know, the colored
Yeah.
and the white drinking
Yeah.
fountains. You had all of that. The schools were segregated, housing was segregated, everything was segregated. And back in those days, it didn't only, I mean, the injustice, which I instinctively knew was wrong and unfair. You know, kids all have a strong sense of what's right and what's wrong, what's fair and what's not. I certainly had that. But back in the day, nobody in Washington had a right to vote.
Wow.
Washington was being controlled by white Dixiecrats in the Congress and in the Senate. And they made all the rules, all the laws. We didn't have a mayor. We couldn't vote for dog catcher. And even today, U.S. citizens living in the nation's capital, supposed to be the capital of the free world, still do not have a voting representative in the Congress of the United States. It's an absolute disgrace.
I was just talking to a friend the other day, and we were talking about voting because my dad grew up in D.C., and that's where his parents were. But my dad also had family in Virginia, in Montrose, Virginia. And we were talking about voting, and I was telling my friend that my grandparents could not vote in D.C.,
Right.
but they could vote in Virginia.
Exactly.
And so I remember my dad saying, yeah, Grammy and Granddaddy used to just drive down to Virginia because that's where his roots were, and they were able to vote there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the rallying cry was freedom, and it didn't only apply to black people. It applied to, my mother was living in Washington, D.C., a U.S. citizen, couldn't vote. It applied to me too. As a girl, I was being discriminated against. When I was ready to graduate from college, from high school, there were very few colleges I could apply to back in the day. They didn't take girls. They only took boys. I mean, the injustice was palpable. And it's wrong.
I'm listening, and I'm listening to your perspective and your perspective because mine was totally different. And the only thing I ever saw, and I grew up in the Bronx, and I don't know whether I was cloaked or we just had it different.
Well, it was New
but
York.
I didn't see what you
Right.
described and hearing the things you're saying. I didn't see any of that. And so for me, it was what I saw on television that really provoked me.
Right.
And I knew I had to get involved. My parents didn't want me involved. My dad, they came from the Deep South. They had
They were
been
scared.
involved with all of this mess that was going on. And what I didn't know and learned later in life was even my father had his own little small business, but he was still harassed and still treated differently. But he never said that to us as young people. So I'm watching this and, saying what I'm going to do, and they're saying, no, you're not. And I just decided, what would they know? They're working. I'm going to get up, get dressed.
You made some good trouble.
Okay, yeah, necessary trouble. And I just went into Harlem because that's where I had to get the bus.
Okay.
Okay, and I picked up the bus from there and got on that bus. And it didn't hit me. What if you don't get back home at a certain hour? That didn't even bother me,
It's all right.
You just got on the bus with everybody else. And everybody, it was such a different world for me. And then I began to hear the stories of what was going on for different people.
I wouldn't say I experienced discrimination directly either. Where we lived, black and white people seemed to get along. The district I went to in Westchester had some busing going on, and we were acknowledged as having this thing going on, the busing, but it worked out fine. My high school was a 7 through 12 high school, and so I didn't really see it directly, but I saw people getting together to discuss it. I remember going to someone's house with my parents, and I don't know if it was Julian Bond or Andrew Young or somebody, but somebody was there talking. And I just remember, looking, I was young again, I just remember looking and I was aware of what was happening, but, I didn't get really activated until after King was killed. But I was aware of what was happening before that.
That was tough.
So it's interesting to me, Catherine, that you were activated so young.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't even think they had that, at least for African Americans in my area. It was just not even heard of. I grew up in an integrated area in the Bronx, so I wasn't in an area where they were all blacks.
Yeah.
Even the apartment building I lived in, okay, my mother used to leave me with a Jewish woman who took care of me because she was a tailor and she would have to go out. So seeing this on television would have me in tears to think that I lived in a country where people were really being hurt like this, just standing up for their rights. And it was like, I got to do something. And I was upset even with my sister and my parents. How do you sit there and not say anything or not do anything and act like this is news? Just news coming on TV from some foreign land. And that's really what drove me to get involved. And I didn't even discuss it. I didn't have a lot of girlfriends, but the few I had, I didn't even discuss it with them because I knew they weren't going to go. And I knew they were not going to get involved.
You were just really independent.
Yeah, I was. Up until this day.
Yeah.
If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. I don't need you.
Yeah.
And I don't need you. I'm just going to get up and do it. Okay? And do what I have to get done.
I like your bad attitude.
Okay?
Okay. I love it.
But it's not over, is it?
No,
And
not at
that's-
all.
That's the problem.
I had workers who would tell me about things that when they moved out to Long Island, You know how they had crosses burnt on their front lawn. I was blown away when I heard it. Okay, because I couldn't believe it.
What
First
year
of all,
was that? Do you remember?
it had to be in the 80s. That's what I'm saying. So when I hear this stuff now, it's like we're just reliving it. We haven't learned our lesson, and we're just reliving what happened then.
It really started before the birth of this nation. Because you think about all the injustice of how the country is put together, with every state having 2 senators, 2 votes in the U.S. Senate, whether they have 100,000 residents or they have 30
20.
million. That's inherently
They get 2.
unfair. Why
That's right.
is that? Because the slave states wanted more power, and they were not going to agree to a
weren't giving up.
union without that concession. Same thing with slavery. Crying out loud. So, we have in our Declaration of Independence the statement that all are created equal, but even the founders of this country did not create a country in which people would be treated equally or have equal rights or even be able to vote. Women couldn't vote.
Yeah, right.
Blacks couldn't vote. Slaves couldn't vote. They were, if you really believe in the consent of the governed, how can you start a country like that? Well, obviously they felt they had to because they wanted to be independent from the British Crown, and there were problems with that. But if you read back into some of the history, this stuff is not new.
Nothing.
No,
Nothing.
it's not.
It took a resurgence after World War II. With a lot of the white veterans who came back were just furious that the blacks had got, such good treatment in the military and were being treated basically better than they thought they should be. And then they didn't want to see that spread. So all of this right-wing white supremacy, neo-fascism grew here in this country and just festered. And then you remember when Obama was inaugurated and the white backlash that happened with that, the horrible things that were said about him and the depictions that were made, and even this is still happening even now. So this is a struggle that this country has never resolved, and I really think that we need to pray for repentance for the people who think because their skin is white they're better than somebody else. I mean, cut me a break. Don't these people read their Bibles? God has no
They
respect
don't
for
have
persons.
Bible. You're making
He
this
looks
wonderful.
on the heart. He
You're
doesn't look at
making
the outward
this
appearance.
thought that everybody has one.
Well, a lot of these people claim they're Christians. They call themselves Christian nationalists, and that was true of the people that started the Civil War in the South. You read some of their original documents. They claimed they were forming a Christian country.
Yeah, based
But
on
they
their
believed that
thoughts.
their Christianity
They had
that
rules.
it was okay for white people to be in charge and everybody else to be subservient. They thought that was somehow Christian, even though the Bible very clearly says that if you have respect of persons, you commit sin.
Well, see, I don't even want to get into that because
Sorry.
everybody
I don't
interprets that differently.
Yes, they do.
And so,
Well, Martin Luther King graduated from Boston University, and I remember seeing him speak with Harry Belafonte, and I was trying to think last night, now where was it? Was it maybe it was some auditorium at BU, I don't really remember. But, so there was a kinship there beyond just regular, like seeing him on television and stuff. So when he was killed, and I was a freshman at BU, the Black Student Union, Umoja, took over the president's office, the administration office, and demanded several things that he acquiesced to. And you remember, because it wasn't just BU, all over the place.
Yeah, all over
They
the
were,
place.
students
yeah.
were uprising and doing all kinds of things.
wasn't just
And
students.
So I'd say that's when I really got sparked.
Yeah.
Then.
Okay.
To see this man that I had seen and I had heard at the march, years before, just killed, that's what got me more.
Okay. More
Going.
involved in it. Yeah. More of a cry. Well, the rallying cry continues.
what's so interesting listening to both of you is one of the things I'm sitting here saying to myself, we will never be in a history book but we are
watching it.
part of history.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, for
And so,
sure.
and so it's interesting on how you get this message out to young people.
Well, okay, I'm going to really put on my preacher's hat here. The young people today don't know their history. They grew up with all the advantages
That's
of the
right.
freedoms
True.
and the rights that
That's
our
right.
generation accomplished, and they think this is just a given because that's how kids are. You know, I mean,
That's
I
right.
grew up with World War II being over. I grew up with that advantage. It happens in every generation, so it's up to the older people, especially parents and grandparents and teachers, to make sure that the young people, that their education is not neglected, and it has been neglected. I have been trying for years to get somebody in this town to sponsor a showing of the whole Eyes on the Prize and get the young people out to see it, make them sit and watch it and learn, teach them. None of this, you know,
if they
whatever you
have to
think,
watch
children.
Eyes on the Prize, it would
Sorry,
have
but-
to be in a school system.
Whatever.
Because when you put it out for the community, you've seen it, right? You've watched it. I've watched how many times amongst the black community. I mean, it's almost like, you know, your name. You watch it over and you watch it over and you watch it over. But the young people don't see that, and they're not sitting down to watch it.
They're on their phones,
They're on,
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
garbage,
phone. That's right. They're on the phones.
doing God knows what to their
Right.
minds, filling their
They're
minds
on
with
the
all
phone.
kinds of
You're right.
stupidity and silliness.
So
We can't
and if
afford
it's not-
this.
no, we can't.
We cannot afford
cannot.
this. We have got to educate people. We have absolutely got to do that. And I mean, I don't have kids, so I'm not involved in the school system. I'll let the rest of you do that. But somebody, I own the DVDs and I own the original videotapes, so I'd be happy to donate them to whoever's going to show them. But the people, the young people, need to learn their history.
Definitely.
Because if they don't, God
Gonna
help them.
repeat
It's
itself.
their,
Repeat
it's
it.
their
That's why it's
future that's
repeating.
getting flushed down the toilet by this regime in Washington and by all these white supremacists and stupid, excuse me.
That's right.
Okay.
I don't suffer fools gladly.
I hear you.
Can you tell? Yeah. And
get
I'm not
emotional.
signing up to be a diplomat.
Okay, guys. This has been a great discussion.
Sorry,
Okay.
you invited me,
Obviously,
right?
there's much more that can be discussed.
Yeah, we need a part two.
But I think that, okay, we do, yeah, you do. You maybe need a part two, but that's not there. Any last remarks? Joyce and Rebecca, y'all been kind of quiet. Rebecca, you've been very
Talking
quiet.
too much.
No, I didn't say you talking too much. I just said you.
You didn't have to. It's all
Well,
fine.
I'm glad that we're doing this because it is so important, like you did say, Catherine, and especially with, and I know we're not supposed to be super political, but seeing as the administration is trying to take honest to goodness history out of, the curriculum, and thank goodness some court just ruled that it has to get put back in, like in museums and stuff like that. So it is important because otherwise our kids won't know, and they'll just be like, globslopped. They'll just be like, they won't be able to cope with it because they haven't had to develop the coping skills that we had to develop to deal with it.
Very true. Any other lasting?
My last words are just being able to get this out to the young people and finding ways in which to, get their energy level up, that they want to do this and want to see and understand and learn more. Because right now, AI has their total concentration. They live on it, phones and all these wonderful things that are made easy for them. But nobody's going to push that button for information on the march unless they're getting credit for something in school.
And then AI will write the essay.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, cheap.
So it's true. You got to get them. What is the saying? If you don't learn by it, you'll repeat
You're
it.
going to repeat those mistakes.
Very true.
Well, my last word is we have got a midterm election coming up that we have got to protect because somebody that knows that they are going to lose are cheating ahead of time to
That's
try to
right.
stop people from voting. any way they can, whether it's vote by mail or whatever. And, you know, we better wake up or we're going to lose our freedoms for everybody, not only for black people. So, you know, this fight is far from over, and we need to pick up the torch and carry it forward for Dr. King's sake, for John Lewis's sake, for the sake of Medgar Evers, all the rest of the martyrs who died for voting rights. We've got to carry that banner forward and make sure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people does not perish from the earth, at least not from this land.
That's
So,
a really good
so,
message.
so Catherine is saying, get in trouble.
That's a good,
Good
trouble, necessary trouble.
trouble. Gotcha.
And don't just sit back and say,
I
well, I
gotcha.
should have done something, but I
Yeah.
guess it's too late now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't want that on your conscience. You don't want to have to tell that to your grandkids either later on.
Okay, with that, we are out of time. A special thank you to our guests for sharing their experiences and for the important work they do to help make our world a better place. And thank you to our viewers for joining us. If there's a topic you'd like to explore, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us at pctvbridgingthegap@gmail.com. Be sure to tune in the future for future episodes as we continue to bridge the gap.